Good evening and welcome back to the Riverdale Minion Parent Parsha series, Parashat Yitro. Last week's parenting tip around food and feeding really got me thinking that I wanted to share some more feeding and food related tips. I have a specialty in eating disorders, and it's an area of research for me. It's an area of clinical expertise for me. And I was thinking that maybe for the next couple of weeks, we could try to pick some small little tips around areas where people struggle, all of us struggle, whether it's we feel anxiety around how we're feeding our kids. There's anxiety around food in our own lives. And oftentimes that translates into how our kids relate to food and our own relationship with food. And food is actually like quite a big part of our ritual, our routine, our day. And it is critical that we have healthy relationships with food. And it's really critical that we as parents encourage and create an environment where our children can have healthy relationships with food. And oftentimes it's a challenge. It's normal that it's a challenge. We live in a world that is heavily disordered eating. And so I was thinking we could really hone in for the next few weeks, perhaps, on some small little eating disorder tips, or preventative eating is what I like to think about in terms of like healthy eating for families and for people to maybe try to incorporate into their home and into their lifestyle. And as always, I'm always available for people to message me. I tried this, it worked, didn't work. A lot of times we have to problem solve. One thing I'm saying is going to work for you, another thing is not going to work for you. One thing works with one kid, but doesn't work with another kid. And it's really about taking an idea and tailoring it to your home, your family, your dynamics, and what you know about your own kid, because always you are the expert on your kid. I always tell clients and parents that I'm working with, it's so easy to sit in the chair and give lots of good advice, but it's actually really hard to be the parents who have to take in that advice and try to figure out how to use it in a way that makes sense for their family and their kid. So the parenting tip on the go for this week, which to some degree is a piggyback from last week. So if you didn't catch it, maybe hop on back to last week. So we talked about the fact that when we restrict food from our children or even from ourselves, more often than not, we end up binging on it, and that there is a very clear relationship between the cycle of restricting and binging. And so what we want to be able to do is to trust that our children are born with skills that they will naturally regulate. They naturally don't overeat, but over time, we as parents, because of our interventions, oftentimes create situations where we have created an environment where they feel like one food is better than another food, and that they have to binge on it because it's not going to be available to them, because we are restricting it, because we're worried that they won't be able to monitor their intake. And so a lot of that comes from our own anxieties, which is a different podcast or a different Zoom video, whatever. But it's something to just put in mind and think about. I was thinking about the one that most parents often struggle with, which is say no to dinner time food battles. Parents will say to me, I am pulling my hair out. I hate dinner time. I hate that I'm fighting with my kids about what they should eat, what they shouldn't eat, what they won't eat, what they refuse to eat. And then I feel like I made dinner, and now I'm annoyed that I made dinner, whoever the I is that made the dinner, because they're not eating it. And then I feel like I'm like a line chef and I'm making multiple foods for dinner. And then you get into this battle, right? Because we're talking about, as we spoke about last week, this idea that we want to create an environment in which all of our children feel like no one food is better than another, and that we actually have to eat food in moderation. All foods have to be taught to be eaten in moderation, and not just that fruits and vegetables are good foods and things like desserts are bad foods. We want to create some amount of equal playing field to remind ourselves that all foods are good, all foods are healthy in moderation. And so one of the things that I often hear and that I have kind of come down on, one of the myths around, is you have to eat X, Y, and Z in order to have dessert. And oftentimes in my own home, even, we've tweaked this from that being a rule I never said, to the notion that, like, well, you do have to sit down and eat something, or attempt to try some of the dinner that is in front of you before going on to the next thing. But when my kids were little, and the research shows us, when I saw this, I was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect for what I wanted to talk about tonight. So I did a lot of my research and eating disorder initial work when I was having very small kids. So I basically used my children as trials. And so one of the things I would do is I would actually put a plate of food, and I would put dessert on the plate. with it. So it would look like chicken, broccoli, and a cookie. And what that actually said to children was, all this is available to you. I don't care what order you eat it in because it's all available to you. And not one thing is better than another. And parents would say to me, I don't understand. They're only going to eat the cookie and then they're going to walk away. And I think one of the things that we really want to be thinking about as parents is the recognition that our kids actually want to eat and be satisfied and eat nutritious foods. And what our job is to do when we're saying no to dinner time food battles is, first of all, we're taking the emotional energy out of it, right? When we get into a battle with our kids around food, when we're yelling, we know that that's not a good place to be. And we've all been there. We all have those moments where, like, why am I yelling about broccoli and fish? That makes no sense, right? We're providing, and this is a really important critical thing. We as the parents are providing children with healthy, nutritious opportunities to eat: breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. We're providing these opportunities for our children to eat. We're giving them, we're not just telling them, go grab whatever you want. We're actually saying to them, it's snack time. What could I help you find? Would you like a fruit? Would you like a vegetable? Would you like a snack? What snack would you like? What will make you feel full? What are you in the mood for? And we're providing that for them. We're not actually leaving them to make up all those decisions for themselves, particularly school age children. As they become older and more adolescents, we want to see that the job that we've done, they are able to take over for themselves, and that then they can take autonomy over that and say, I think I'm in the mood for this, but I'm not in the mood for that. I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm still hungry. I don't know if I'm still full. I don't know if I'm bored. I don't know if I'm nervous. And that's making me want to eat something, right? We're actually helping to frame our children's choices around food. And when we do that, we take away the battle and we're actually just asking questions and we're listening, but we're also setting a framework. And that's an important critical piece to this story. So when parents say to me, I can't believe you say that all things are allowed in moderation, or I can't believe you say that kids can always have dessert. What I say to that is, yes, but you are going to help structure that for them. So if your kid walks in at 4:30 and says, I'm really hungry, I need to have a snack right now, it's okay as a parent to also say, oh, I'm happy that you're hungry because I really made a great dinner. I think you're going to be okay to hang tight for a half an hour. Dinner is at 5 o'clock. So I think that that is providing a framework for them, right? Or you might do an all call at a certain hour and say, hey, everyone just walked in from the door from school. It's 3:30, dinner's at 5. Now's the time for snack. How can I help you have a snack? Sometimes that might mean you provided snacks available to them. You said there's fruit on the counter, there's vegetables on the counter, and there's some crackers on the counter. And why don't you there's some place, why don't you grab what sounds good to you? And then you might say, okay, I'm taking it away because dinner is going to be in an hour and then you're going to be able to have dinner. And the same thing that there's an all call. When you all call and you set the structure, what you're doing as a parent is you are feeding them and you're giving permission for them to feel like now is time to eat, but you're also helping them structure it. And you're also helping them moderate. So if a kid walks out holding 6 cookies from the closet, you might say to them, oh my goodness, you have a lot of cookies. So hold up. You just had dinner. We're going to have an after dinner snack. I see that you love these cookies. Why don't we think about what's going to make your tummy feel full? And then the kid might say, well, I need 6. And I was like, oh, let's start with 3 because that's what's a normal snack size. And then if you really love these cookies, let's put some in your backpack for snack tomorrow. Sometimes you see that kids are nervous, right? And this just has to do with knowing your kid. They're nervous that maybe some other kid is going to get to the cookie jar before them. And so they feel like they have to grab extra cookies. So when we remind them and say, you don't have to worry about that. I see you're almost nervous. There's not going to be any more cookies. I'll make you more cookies, or let's put some cookies in a bag and let's put it aside. What we're trying to do is we're taking away the battles. We're asking questions and we're listening, but we're also providing the framework, right? So sometimes you might say, I'm going to put food on the plate and everybody has to try 2 bites of this food, but we're also setting the standard and providing them with nutritious meals. Now, by the way, when we're providing them with nutritious meals, sometimes we also make the decision, which is again, a different conversation about dinner times and the way that dinners are structured and who's at the dinner table. But I think that we're also really setting the framework to say, okay, I'm putting all of this on your plate. I'm putting a little bit of fish and a little bit of broccoli and a little bit of rice. And everybody has to try something new even if you think you might not like it, sometimes our taste buds change. That's like a cool thing. And so everybody's going to take 2 bites. And if you still don't like it, that's your choice. You don't have to eat it, but this is what's for dinner. So like I recommend you eating it because you might be hungry later. But you're also helping them, show them what a plate is, and you're providing that food for them. You're not leaving it for them to choose it. So on the one hand, I always like to leave food out on a table, but when I do like initial, I usually like take a pause and say, what can I get you? Here's this, this, and this. I want to put some of this on your plate, depending on how old they are and they're able to kind of develop a certain level of autonomy. But for younger kids, I kind of just like make a plate and just put it down there and say, you could always have more. But when you start with this, please try 2 bites of everything that's on your plate. You never know what's going to change. And I see it happen that like, everybody complained about a meal for like 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, well, maybe you did something different to it. And I'm thinking to myself, no, nothing different happened. I just, you just got used to it, or you decided you liked it, or maybe I did take out a weird spice, but kind of like thinking about how we move ourselves away from battles. I also think that every family has their easygoing kid around food and has their more challenging kid around food. That is part of family dynamics, and that's okay. And you are not alone. And I think one of the things I also encourage, and I do think in terms of taking out the food time battles, is when you see that kid who's moping and you want to lose it because you're just annoyed. You made dinner and they're cranky and they're not being respectful of the food that you made, and you feel like they're not making good choices, and you feel like they're not eating something nutritious, and you just want to kind of lose it. You want to take a deep breath, walk away, and then come back and say, I see that you're having a hard time with dinner. So, like, can you tell me what you would have liked to have had for dinner? So, sometimes I'm very mindful to try to actually have foods that everybody likes, not always. And sometimes everybody has to take a turn in the course of a week. Sometimes I may have like a Wednesday night choice night where different kids get to rotate and pick the meal, and we try to find things that like work. But I think in terms of like actually trying to take away some of that food time battles, and really take a step back and kind of really help structure. And I think like you see that particularly if you kind of say to kids, well, take what you want. And by the way, when we do that and we say like, oh, I can't deal with dinner, or like, this is frustrating me, just grab something. Of course they're going to gravitate. And then they grab the yogurt and you're like, oh, obviously they're grabbing that yogurt. Like, that's just like their go-to. But like, we're not providing a different structure for them. So I think you kind of either have to stick to your guns and say, this is what's for dinner, and you have to try it and hopefully you'll like it. And if not, you'll eat again tomorrow for breakfast and you still have your after night snack, but that's not going to be a home meal. So like, I really hope you make a good choice, just because I don't want you to be hungry, but it is your choice. And I think that's a hard thing as a parent to say. I'm acknowledging it's a hard thing to say, but I think that it really can go the distance. And then kind of circling back and being able to ask those questions. So say no to dinner time food battles. There are many layers of this. There are many tips of this, and there are many ways to think about this in terms of the transition from baby to toddler to middle school to adolescence in terms of their level of responsibility. But I think that the key critical piece is that we as parents are providing opportunities to eat. We're providing frameworks to eat. We're providing a structure around the eating in terms of what's available, how much is available. And in that way, then you don't even have to have those conversations. This is a vegetable. This is a protein. You don't even have to talk about it. You're just doing it. You're showing it so that they know, just by showing it without having to talk about it, what a healthy plate looks like. It doesn't have to be a discussion. It's just like, this is what's available. I want everyone to try a bite of 2 things on this plate. You don't want to let your own bias come in. If you say, well, you have to have 2 bites of broccoli and 2 bites of fish, but you don't have to have 2 bites of rice. Well, what message are you sending? So be consistent, be mindful, and really kind of try to disengage from that energy that we all kind of fall into, and remind ourselves that dessert isn't contingent on dinner, and dinner is not contingent on dessert, and snacks aren't contingent on meals. They're independent meal opportunities, and they're just other opportunities to provide a framework for teaching our kids how to make good choices, which includes dessert category type foods. We want to help our kids regulate and moderate that for themselves, so that they can do that for themselves as they're not in our home and are kind of spending more time outside the home in middle school and adolescence. The very short Torah that I had for this week, the one thing about the food piece is that it not always going to dovetail into the Parsha. So one article I just was reading today is by Rabbi Avishai David, who was actually the Rosh Yeshiva when I was in MMY many moons ago. He has a book called Drash Yosef, and he's actually the Rosh Yeshiva of I think it's Torah Shraga currently, and he has an interesting article in there. So I suggest you go and find it yourself to read all the details. And he was talking about the role that he was specifically talking about the role that Yitro plays in making an awareness around Moshe and like what Moshe's responsibility was as a leader and the type of leader that Moshe was. And when he was coming to ask Moshe, making this observation about what's going on, that Moshe's there day in and night, and Moshe's own hesitancy, what Rabbi Avishai David highlights that I think is so powerful is the fact that Moshe really wanted to be the type of leader that was available to everybody, that he had a unique skill set of both a tremendous amount of knowledge and also a tremendous amount of humility. The recognition that no one's question is more important than somebody else's question, right? The more you know, the more humble you are because you recognize how much more there is to learn. And Moshe's sense of humility around the fact that no person, no question was too much for him. No, he didn't just want to be the person who people went to with the big questions, but if there was a smaller question, they went and saw somebody else. He wanted to be a manhig, he wanted to be a leader, which is an important role model for all of us, whether we're manhigim in our family, in our community, whether it's that we are helping with consultations, independent of whether or not this is specific to somebody who's answering piskei halacha, but I think we can extrapolate it into our own lives, and depending on the roles we find ourselves in, with the recognition that no matter who the person is that's asking something from us, or that we're being a role model, to the ability to really take in the notion of humility in such a profound way that we can always learn from other people, and that every person brings something to the table and no one person is more important than somebody else. And I think that the Nachal Kedumim really highlights this about Moshe. It asks such a good question. It says, how is it possible that Moshe didn't know this idea before Yitro came? It says, Yesh mi shekatav te'ech yitaken de Moshe ben Allah hashalom lo yada etza zu midato ad sheba Yitro. Like, Moshe didn't come to think that he should put in a category of stages of people to ask questions. V'im hu lo yada, and if in reality he really didn't know, ech Hashem lo tivao, so then wouldn't Hashem have commanded of him? Like, why did it have to be that Yitro came and said, like, saw this and was like, I have a great idea? And so what the Nachal Kedumim posits is that, Moshe himself was worried that perhaps by creating a system and a hierarchy system, all that would result is people feeling a certain amount of jealousy and hierarchy. I get more questions than you, or I'm more capable of answering these questions, or people feeling like that person's answering my question, but that person's not. And so in that way, he decided like it was something he wanted to stay away from, and he would just answer everybody's questions and everybody would be on an equal playing field. But it was through Yitro coming, the zechut of Yitro, to really bring this reality of what Hashem had in mind to fruition, and to tell Moshe that like it would be okay. But Moshe's initial gut was because he was concerned about this possibility, that people, when you start to answer more questions, when people are consulting with you or asking you for your opinion, it's so easy unintentionally to start to think about like, I'm really holding the knowledge, and to really try to remind ourselves, like all of us in whatever role we play, and the message from Moshe and Yitro. And in that way, maybe Yitro really saw the best in everybody. He was like, this is a possibility where we can have a hierarchy, and yet people can still feel a sense of chesed and kindness and equality in a positive way, that Moshe can be a role model for other people, and that people have the ability and the zechut to take that in. Okay, Parsha Treats. Okay, so one thing I just want to point out to you is sometimes you'll see that like I make a lot of different treats, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, she's talking about moderation, she's talking about all these treat things, but then she has tons and tons of them in her house. How is that moderation? So I just want to tell you that sometimes when I make certain things, I make them like, and not in crazy amounts. Like if I'm going to make a batch of cupcakes, I might only bring out a dozen for Shabbos. That way I also prepared for the next week, so I can pull those out. And so sometimes I'll have different things. Sometimes there'll be more, sometimes there'll be less, sometimes we mix it up. But sometimes I'm doing multiple different options or opportunities. Sometimes I may have lots of them, but sometimes I might just be like, okay, everybody's going to get one cupcake, or one cupcake Shabbos day and one cupcake Friday night, usually vice versa. But but I definitely think that like that's just an important piece to put out there. Okay, so this week's parsha, there are lots of good things, as in all the parshiyot, but this one we had a few. So first, anything that you took for Shavuos, you could take for now. So like I did flour lollipops because the Har Sinai had flowers on them, and I happened to have had, because I had for Shavuos, luchot chocolate melts, but you could see here they used marshmallows and then just like wrote on them. If you have edible pen, great. If you don't need to use those, and you could just put them on there and you get the gist. I love all of the challahs. Somehow my challahs, by the time they've baked, they kind of start to look a little bit misformed. So I'm not sure I'm going to go down that rabbit hole, but these happen to be quite beautiful luchot. We also suggested to do gavels in this week's parsha because of the institution of the judges and the system of judges. So anything related to judges and justice, I give you lots of encouragement to get very creative. That was basically where my creativity started and stopped. You could do a book and write law on top of it. The animal in the corner is an eagle, because in this week's parsha, it says very clearly that Hashem took us out, al kanfei nesharim. So if you want to do an eagle, the way that they did these eagles was you could do them your own way, but I think they put them on like some type of like trio Oreo, and they rolled a marshmallow in shredded coconut. They used cashews for noses. If anybody knows me well, they know I'm not particularly good with nut allergies. I don't, thank God nobody in my house has them. And also I'm good at lots of things, and I'm not good at that. Like I'm that mom who sends peanut butter and jelly to school. So I'm working on it. It's something I'm working on. But if you are nut sensitive, then they suggested using toffee as the nose or the beak for the eagle. And I'm excited to see what everybody else creates for Parashat Yitro. Have a great end of week. Have a good Shabbat and stay warm.